here at the Polar Travel Company. I am in great company today. I'm thrilled about this webinar. I will first say hello to Agustin and Sebastian.
Hey,
Hey
how
there.
are you? Hello.
And
Hello, everyone.
yes, and hello to everybody on the other side of the screen. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have an amazing attendant. We are talking today with Morten Jorgensen. I hope I am pronouncing that right, Morten. If not, I'm so sorry. We are here with Morten, who is an Arctic specialist, a specialized travel. He's been going to Antarctica and the Arctic since many, many years. I'm not going to say how many. I will let him say that if he wants to. And his travels in the Arctic has led him to um, develop a particular passion for polar bears. And that is why we are so thrilled to talk to him today. Hello, Morten. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you. Very good to be here, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you all.
Great. Shall we dive right in?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so one of the things that in my short experience I have been asked about polar bears is do they hibernate like most of bears? And if they are always on the ice, would you like to give us a little insight to that to start with?
Yeah, interesting questions. They're definitely not always on the ice. Polar bears prefer the ice. They're adapted to the sea ice as a habitat, as their environment. And I would say if I was able to crawl into the mind of a polar bear and ask it the question, it would probably say that yes, it would very much like to always be on this ice because it feels at home there. It is made for the ice, so to speak. But in the reality, most polar bears do not live their whole lives on the ice, but also come ashore. And sometimes to come ashore, they have to swim. So they can be on ice, they can be on land, or they can actually be in the water. And I guess by saying that, I've also answered the other question, because it would be impossible for polar bears to hibernate on the ice. And since I've said that they ideally would like to be the whole time on the ice, basically they would not be able to hibernate. So the answer to that question is no, they do not hibernate. Most polar bears are more or less active the whole year round. However, the females that will give birth and have to go through the cycle of reproduction, they will go into a den. They are not hibernating when they're in the den, but they will need protection from the environment during the period where they are producing the young. And so the non-pregnant females, the males, the immature bears, all of these bears are not in a den, and they're not hibernating. They're simply out in the environment year round.
Great. You just answered the next question that at least I wanted to ask you about this is, so what happens? So the idea that we get from a bear hibernating, it's only this image that we have of the pregnant female getting somewhere sheltered to be able to finish the pregnancy. But then like juvenile females or whatever, it doesn't matter, but males or females that are not doing that, they just roam around during the winter, like what?
Yeah, it's remarkably, the answer is yes. Of course, there is a tendency for the bears to reduce their activity levels when they are not in an optimal energy situation. If the weather is extremely harsh, if there is a snowstorm, or indeed if they are having difficulties finding their prey, then polar bears are actually able to, while they are not hibernating, they can switch their metabolism to a much lower metabolism, which basically conserves energy. So I wouldn't I wouldn't want to portray the polar bears as jumping around on the ice 12 months a year, including in the winter, but they are certainly awake, and they are able to travel. They're not just lying down, but they are traveling, and they're also hunting during the winter. So if opportunity provides for the chance to hunt and to eat, they will do that with as much energy as any other time of the year. And actually, the winter is not necessarily the worst season for a polar bear. The summer can be just as difficult. Well, it's all about food and resources and energy. And the most important time for a polar bear to catch seals, which is its main prey, and to stock up on energy, so to speak, to get fat, is actually the part of the winter and the early part of spring, which is also the time when the seals are having their pups.
Right.
It's when the sea ice is at its maximum. It is when the sea ice is most stable as a platform. And this is the time when the seals are giving birth, and it's also the time then when the polar bears are most actively hunting and basically eating more than they need for the time being, because they're also eating to fill up their reserves. And polar bears have an amazing ability to double or even triple their body weight during times when there is a lot of food, which is the late winter or spring. So that's the good time for them. The bad time for them is actually the summer and the late summer, because this is the time when the seals are most difficult to get to. We think of that as the best time because we are not really Arctic beings. We are more used to.
We think about temperature. We think that is the most.
We think about comfort, temperature, and we think that, and also the ability to get around. So when there's less ice, we can better transport ourselves in the Arctic. So we think that's the best time of year. But for a polar bear, it's almost the worst time of year, because the ice is melting, the ice is not stable, the seals are no longer immature and inexperienced. The pupping season is over. Many of the seals are in the water where the polar bear cannot catch them. So that's actually a time when they perhaps reduce their metabolism and then go into this slower state of being while they're using their fat reserves and waiting for the good times to come back, which is when the ice forms again.
That's so cool. And actually, one of the most famous polar bears populations that we have been talking about lately are the ones that are around Churchill in Canada. Though I was there last October, I could see them on land, and they seem actually like you just described, like very mellow, looking around, smelling the air, but not doing much. And one of the things that we were wondering inside the tundra buggy, seeing the polar bears there in the dirt, like no ice and polar bears, that's something that could be a little bit strange to think for most people. Do they actually hunt at all? For example, in a place like the surroundings of Churchill, like you couldn't see anything but hares or grass. And I actually saw a polar bear munching on some grass and some algae. Yep. So do they hunt at all? If they could, like if something would come.
That's a really, really good question. And I like it for several reasons. I like the logic behind the question, but I also like it because it gives me an opportunity to say the following. Polar bears are very, very individually different. They're highly intelligent and they're highly adaptable. So they have this incredible flexibility in their behavior to adapt to the situation, whether it's long-term or short-term. So even locally and seasonally, they can change their behavior, depending on the individual. So just like human beings, there are clever ones, there are dumb ones, there are more experienced ones, less experienced ones. There are those who learn from their experience and their mistakes, and there are those who don't. But generally, they do learn, and a lot of the polar bear life is all about learning how to survive. So a polar bear is not born with the ability to survive. but it learns how to survive from its mother the first 2.5 years, and then from experience. So generally, no. The answer is generally, polar bears are not hunting when they're not on the ice where they can hunt
Yes.
seals. This is the main story, but there are individual differences, and there are also opportunistic polar bears. So one of the
Right.
famous situations from Svalbard, from Norway, from the last couple of seasons is that, again, because of poor ice conditions, some polar bears have been observed to hunt reindeer on land, and successfully. Not
Wow.
This is not very common, and it is almost certainly a learned behavior for that a couple of bears perhaps are expressing. It's not the whole population that can suddenly switch to reindeer.
Right.
Other bears are feeding on bird cliffs or bird colonies, and you can call it hunting. You can also call it scavenging, in the sense that they are always looking for something that they can eat, and they are willing to eat practically anything. So a polar bear is not hunting per se through the summer if it's on land, but it is scavenging, and it is constantly searching for an opportunity to feed on a carcass, or on a bird it comes across, or on a hare or a reindeer or a goose nest, or something in the garbage dump of Churchill, which is why they have problems there.
Right.
Yeah, so it's very, very interesting we think of this. We have this tendency to uniform our thinking of the animal as a top predator, as a terminator, a killer,
Right.
which is only works in one way. But the reason that polar bears are a successful survivor is that they're very flexible and
Plastic,
able to
right.
change plastic, yes, and able to change their behaviors and learn from experience.
That's so cool. And that also makes me wonder, do they rely mostly on smell or sight? How do they see in the darkness of winter, of the Arctic winter?
Well, obviously they have eyes, they have ears, but their nose is what is most important.
What is most important to them?
And exactly mentioning the Arctic winter is an example of why this makes sense. In the Arctic winter, it tends to be dark. If you're far enough north, it tends to be very dark for weeks, for months. Also, another feature of the pack ice, the sea ice, is fog, and it's very, very often foggy, even during the summer and when there is light. And in dense fog or in darkness, nobody can see, except if you have vision like an owl or something like that, which the polar bears have not. So polar bears have very good vision, as good as human beings, maybe better, but they rely mostly on their nose to get an idea about their surroundings. And they can smell many, many times better than human beings. They can smell better than dogs. They're able to detect the scent of something from a long, long distance, of course, depending on the wind direction and the strength of the odor. But the nose is what really brings them through life. Yeah.
And I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to maybe ask Aus or Sebas if they have any, because I want to leave for the last part of this conversation about the population and how many bears are there and so on, which is also a very hot topic. But so females and males, so polar bears are basically solitary animals, correct? Females and males would gather together only during the reproductive season.
Not correct. This is another myth, which is, there are many, many myths about polar bears and simplifications. And I think calling them exclusively a solitary animal is also a simplification. So polar bears tend to be solitary because, and it makes sense if you think of their habitat again, if you consider that they live on this platform of ice, which is very how do you say that, undependable, which is varying. It's shifting with the currents, it's shifting with the winds, it's breaking up in the summer, it's forming again. And on this platform, they have to catch prey. They're a large, warm-blooded predator. They need a lot of energy, so they need to catch prey very regularly. And seals are highly adapted to use the ice to rest on, but also to very quickly slip in the water and get away. So it's not an easy task being a polar bear. Now, being a polar bear in a flock would be practically impossible, because you cannot hide, you cannot sneak up, and you would hardly be able to get enough energy to feed everybody in the flock. So the adaptation to a solitary lifestyle makes complete sense when you think of the environment that they are adapted to survive in. However, again, they're highly they're highly flexible, they're highly intelligent, and they have this ability to shift from a solitary lifestyle, if you will, or a solitary daily life to a highly social gathering if they are not in competition for food. So we very often see that as soon as there is enough food, then many polar bears can come together and spend time together and socialize. This happens between sexes, but the most common social bond is actually between males. So two or more males very often bond and play and have fun when they are not competing for resources. Like if they're resting in the vicinity of a whale carcass, they find a whale carcass, there will be a lot of socializing and a lot of playing going on among all the bears that use their nose to find the same spot.
Right. And typical imagery, I think the last time I saw something about polar bears was BBC, and it was a mother and two cubs. And all of a sudden, like a male, I'm not even sure it was matching. I mean, they put images together, probably was not the situation. But I remember the female with the cubs and the boy saying she has to protect her cubs from that male, as if it was an adult male and a young male, like going around her with the cubs, and then explaining the situation that she has to protect her cubs from another polar bear. Does that make sense?
Well, it's very often repeated, and I'm not surprised that it gets repeated on BBC as well, because they're highly commercialized channels that need to tell a good story, and if they don't have a good story, they will make a good story. So like you say,
is it a true story?
Well, there is some truth in it, but again, I don't like to promote those stories too much, because they contain an oversimplification. So yes, it happens that male polar bears kill cubs. However, this is not the standard or the normal male polar bear behavior. I like to, when I get this question and when I answer it, I like to often say, think about it in this way. Do human males kill children? Yes, it happens. But going from there to a generalization is taking it too far. Human males kill children if they are psychologically, socially, mentally, or otherwise stressed. It's a stress reaction. It's a sick behavior, we call it. It's not the normal behavior of a normal person in a normal state of mind. And so it's not everyday behavior for a male to go around looking for polar bear cubs to kill. That doesn't make sense biologically either. However,
no, absolutely. Hence the question.
Absolutely. However, there's a big size difference between female polar bears and male polar bears. The male polar bears are big and strong and have the potential of damaging both females and also cubs. So, and females are good mothers. So they are going to protect their young from any danger, any damage that might happen, and they prefer to be careful and overcautious rather than be sorry. So a natural reaction for a female with cubs when she sees males coming along is to be cautious and to think of a strategy where she can protect her cubs best possible from any potential trouble. And that would be perhaps to retract, or to just lay low, or wait for the bears to go away, for the males to go away. So part of the myth that is also very often repeated is that, but the male will always want to try to kill the cubs because he wants to mate with the female. And he can only mate with the female if she has interest,
Yes,
and she will not have interest while she has cubs. The last part is true. As long as she has cubs, she's not interested in mating. However, killing the cubs will not necessarily bring that female into a receptive situation. For instance, if it's the wrong time of year, it won't happen.
Right.
And it certainly, and even if it's the right time of year, it won't happen immediately. So it's a very, it's again a very simplified image that we get, that all males are trying to kill cubs, and they will always want to do that, and it's basically sexually driven because they want to mate. I think sometimes it might be because they are nutritionally stressed, and for a polar bear, anything edible is edible, and they will also eat. They also eat polar bears. So a polar bear that comes across a polar bear carcass will eat off this carcass if it feels like it, if it's hungry. And so a young polar bear, a polar bear cub, is a potential meal if you are a male polar bear, which is nutritionally stressed and looking for any opportunity to get any kind of energy.
That's awesome. No, it makes so much sense when you hear it this way. Guys, do you have any questions you would like to ask Morten, or should I get to the?
On my side, I'm enjoying it so much.
So much.
I'm so pleased to have Morten. As you know how much I enjoyed working with you, and I enjoy your talks as well. And it's so easy to understand, and it's fantastic.
No, thank
when
you.
You explain it, when Morten explains it, it is easy to understand. Sometimes when I get a book, it's not that easy.
Yes, that's the way I wanted to explain it.
Yeah,
that's what I meant to say.
I do have a question. It's also a general question that I've heard or read here and there. It's about interbreeding with other bear species from polar bears. So, how much is true about that?
Well, this happens, and it's documented. It's a fact. It is not a myth as such, but again, it has a tendency to be a very sensationalist headline, so it gets a lot of attention, and then people also have a tendency to speculate. Oh, but then what happens next if this is happening all the time? So the reality is that there are very few known situations where polar bears and brown bears have mated and produced offspring. So we don't actually have any evidence of the mating except in captivity. But we have evidence of the mating in the wild indirectly because we have offspring, which has been hunted, shot, documented. So we know that there are some hybrids walking around that have had a polar bear and a grizzly bear, brown bear, as parents. We also know that this offspring is potentially fertile and can again produce offspring. And this is, of course, challenging to our normal understanding of what a species is, because one of the things we learn in school is that a species is defined by the fact that it cannot reproduce with something which is of another species. But that's again because our definition of species is a closed box, but nature and evolution is open. And polar bears and brown bears are so closely related that they can mate and they can produce offspring, and they can even produce fertile offspring. However, so what we need to also know is, well, how common is this, and is it really a problem?
Right.
the reality is that there are very few observations of hybrid polar brown bears in the wild. And the last I have read is that either all of the known cases, or at least the vast majority of the known cases, they all stem from the same original event. So they are second or third or fourth generation hybrid bears that are descendants of the first time when it happened, when a brown bear and a female polar bear mated, had offspring. That fertile offspring then again mated with polar bear and had offspring, etc. So it's not as if
sorry, as if you were having some sort of a subpopulation thing that it's going on. You mean?
It's very, very few bears. It's not populated. It's a matter of a few bears that have been observed in the same general area, and to my knowledge, based on what I've been reading, we either know or speculate, but I think it's known that most of these bears stem from the same grandmother or great grandmother that mated with a brown bear. So it's rare, and but it has also happened in captivity. And perhaps it's slightly more common than we know, because, of course, we're not observing every single bear out there in the wild. So maybe there are some we haven't seen.
Wait, what do you mean it happened in captivity? Someone put a polar bear in? No. What do you mean it happened in captivity? No way. Really?
Yeah. Well, yes. People do all kinds of things with bears and with animals in captivity. Some of the famous ones are lion and tiger, and the offspring between lion and tiger. So it has been done. I don't know where. I don't know the details. Who has done it and when it was done and whether it's being repeated. But it has known to happen.
Right.
So
which
one of
brings me. No, finish. Sorry, it just keeps questions keep popping in my mind.
One of the speculations is that with climate change and global warming, and polar bears to some degree being forced south, because when the ice melts in the north, they either drown or they come further south to land. This is a very coarse generalization, and it's not true everywhere in the Arctic, but that is the overall picture if we imagine an Arctic Ocean with no ice in the future. At least during the summer, then all the bears up there will have to come down to the continents and be on land. Right. At the same time, the brown bears are moving north because, again, climate change, etc., gives an opportunity to move north and expand their range north. So the overlap situation between brown bear and polar bear is probably going to be more frequent, probably already more frequent than historically, and more frequent in the future. And then people speculate, well, does this mean that there will be a whole new species evolving because polar bears and brown bears will mate more often? But this is all speculation, and so far it's a rare event. It is more likely that it's trouble for polar bears because there's a tendency for brown bears to be more competitive and more aggressive in the meeting with polar bears. And so the problem is more that brown bears will possibly push polar bears out of their range to the extent that they otherwise would overlap. So that is perhaps a bigger problem than in breeding, interbreeding.
That is so interesting. In my time in Churchill, when they explained when they would catch polar bears, and there was a person there that used to work with grizzlies and browns, and he mentioned that the attitudes toward being catched, polar bears were very docile. Like once they would get in the trap, they would just give themselves in, and grizzlies and brown bears would fight and be aggressive, and polar bears would just be mellow. So kind of makes sense with what you are just saying.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that, but I'm not surprised in a way. There's one place in the world where you have seasonal sea ice, but you don't have polar bears, and that is in the Sea of Okhotsk in the Russian Far East.
Northern Japan, right? North of Japan, right?
North of Japan, west of Kamchatka. So this whole enclosed sea is enclosed, and therefore has its own, I wouldn't call it microclimate because it's a big place, but its own climate. You have a relict population of bowhead whales down there, which is otherwise a high Arctic whale. And you have ice seals that depend on ice, and you have the seasonal ice. It's ice-free in the summer, but you have ice cover in the winter. Exactly what you have many places in the Arctic where you have polar bears. But the prevailing theory why there are no polar bears in this area is that there are too many brown bears. So the Sea of Okhotsk is surrounded by brown bears. And there are very high population numbers on the west side, the north side, and the east side. And so probably polar bears are simply kept out. It's not their range because the brown bears keep them out.
Right. And since you just said there are no polar bears there, it brings me to a question that we get a lot, and I'm going to ask it. So, polar bears in the Arctic, penguins in Antarctica. And we always explain there are no penguins in the Arctic, there are no polar bears in the Antarctic. What do you think would happen if someone puts a polar bear in Antarctica? We get that question a lot, guys. Come on, you're laughing, but you want to know what Morten thinks.
So if you put one polar bear, not much will happen.
Not much, no, I know. If you bring, some.
Yeah, so, and there are actually people who have seriously suggested that this might be a solution as a prevention of extinction, because the polar bear is seriously threatened by many, many different causes in the north. And so some people are saying, well, let's just put them somewhere else, like the Antarctic. Well, I think it would be an ecological disaster if we try to. Yes, if we try to establish a population of polar bears on the Antarctic Peninsula, all of the bird life down there, the penguins and other species, including the seals for that matter, are adapted to a life where they do not in any way expect a land predator, a predator arriving from land. So they expect to be chased when they go in the water, and they are also on the lookout for something coming from the air, like the skuas and giant petrels. But you can walk right up to a penguin and it will hardly move because they don't have this instinct that anything will be chasing them coming across land. So a polar bear would have a feast and another feast and another feast, and then it would basically eradicate one colony after another of penguins and other land-breeding birds, and it would probably also have very easy time getting to seals, at least during some of the season. And I think it would be a disaster.
Right. No, I imagine I just wanted to pop that question because we get that question a lot. I'm sure you got it at some point in your career.
Yes,
and you mentioned about conservation of polar bears. You want to tell us a little bit? So we understand that all around the Arctic Ocean, we have ice and we have different populations of polar bears. Do we know today, in general, how many bears there are, where in all that Arctic area polar bears are more abundant? How is the information? Is it scattered? Do we know more about some populations than others? Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
How many hours do we have?
10 more minutes, 15 more minutes.
Okay, I'll try. I wrote 2 books about this subject.
I know.
It's very, very difficult to answer in 10 minutes, but it's a good challenge, so I'll try. We know something. Accepted. We know something about polar bear populations for several reasons. One of them is that polar bears were visibly disappearing and being reduced in numbers already during the 20th century and up towards the middle, and especially during the middle of after the Second World War in the 50s and 60s. It was obvious that polar bears were being decimated by overhunting. So polar bear populations were reduced. They were disappearing from parts of their range. And people who were observing this were concerned that something had to be done to prevent the polar bear from going extinct. So commercial hunting and also sports hunting was very widespread, and the numbers of killed bears per year were tremendous. To make a very, very long story very short, this resulted in an agreement, an international agreement to protect polar bears, which was signed by all of the Arctic nations that have polar bears in 1973. At the same time, they also agreed, part of the agreement was that more international cooperation was necessary to share information about polar bear populations and to study polar bear populations, because it was recognized that we had no idea how many polar bears there are.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, the protection agreement was not sufficiently detailed and sufficiently strong-worded to prevent the hunting from continuing. So 3 of the 5 countries that have polar bear populations in the Arctic are still hunting polar bears today. And the hunting pressure is reduced relative to the 1950s and 60s, but it's not substantially reduced. It's reduced by perhaps 20-30%, maybe 40%. But we're still killing as many as up towards 1,000 polar bears per year, 900 to 1,000 polar bears per year. Wow. In the Arctic. And so the hunting pressure is still continuing. And at the same time, the uncertainty about how many polar bears there are is also continuing, despite 50 years of research. And the reason for this is that polar bears there are several reasons for it, but one of them is that polar bears are very thinly distributed in a huge, vast area. Again, they're not flock animals. They're mostly solitary. They're very well camouflaged. They live in places where it's often dark and often foggy. There are all kinds of reasons why it's very difficult to count polar bear populations. Another reason, so it's very expensive and very difficult. And in almost 2/3 of the Arctic, polar bears have never been counted. Or it is more than perhaps 20-25 years ago that there was an attempt to count them. So we know a lot about some polar bear subpopulations, some parts of the Arctic, where they're more easy to study, and also where the political desire to know how many there are in order to legitimize the hunting is greater. So the most of the polar bears which are shot in Canada. And Canada also is the most active in trying to produce numbers that justify the hunting. So there's a lot of political, there's a lot of political interest, commercial political interest in Canada in producing numbers that can justify the continuation of the hunting. And so some of the populations are very well studied, and others are not. And then again, if you go to Russia, there are no studies that document the population sizes of the Russian subpopulations. On the other hand, Russia was the first country in the world to protect the polar bear completely and introduce a ban on hunting. So there's no legal hunting in Russia, therefore also no incentive to spend many, many millions of dollars or rubles to count the bears, because it's not really necessary from a commercial point of view. Right.
And you, not without speaking about the quotas that that First Nations would have, like in places like Greenland, for example. You're not counting that, or you are?
Oh yes, I am. Very much. Okay. So, the polar bears hunted in Greenland, in Canada, and in Alaska. And in all 3 places, in theory, the hunting is only undertaken by Inuit people.
Right.
So Canada is the only country which allows trophy hunting today. It used to be a lot of trophy hunting in Svalbard and also in Alaska, but those countries have banned it. But it is ongoing. It's an industry in Canada. But legally, technically, it has to be an Inuit who is leading the hunt. So
Uh,
the foreigner who wants to shoot a polar bear can do so, but he must be
if
brought face to face with the bear by an Inuit. And
by an Inuit.
the Inuit is leading the hunt. It is technically an Inuit hunt, and that shot polar bear comes out of the Inuit quota. So it's not additional to the quota, it's part of the quota.
Right.
In Greenland, there is no selling of part of the quota to trophy hunting, and also not in Alaska. But in Canada, it is ongoing. The problem, of course, is whether you can call this commercialized polar bear hunting a continuation of tradition, or whether that is actually a falsification of the situation and like just a poor excuse to let the hunting continue. This is the big debate question, and this is why I've written 2 books about it, because most people are afraid of confronting the dilemma of wanting indigenous peoples to have rights to continue their traditional lifestyle, and the dilemma of that lifestyle already being corrupted and commercialized, and also the animal being threatened with extinction. So there's a huge conflict of interest, and out of political, what is the opposite of courage?
Cowardness.
Cowardice. Thank you. Out of political cowardice, there's almost nobody who is willing to confront this problematic situation and speak on behalf of the bear. So everybody is speaking on behalf of a political interest, a cultural interest, a commercial interest, a political interest, but nobody is really saying, well, who is protecting the bear? So this is the point of my activism, if you will. It is trying to say the dead bear is a dead bear, and it doesn't really matter if it was shot by an Inuit or by a white man, or if it was shot for food, or if it was shot for the skin, for the commercial value of the skin. Anyway, that is a long discussion. I think I already spent the 10 minutes, huh?
You've done an amazing job, and I will save that long discussion for a new webinar. Morten,
Yes.
it is so amazing to hear you. It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, complete pleasure. I was so happy to have the invitation, and I'm happy we succeeded in setting it up in time, and here we are.
You did.
So yeah,
guys,
happy to continue this. If your audience is interested in hearing more, I'm always happy to talk about these issues, and also talk more about the polar bear itself, the animal itself. It's also fascinating.
Absolutely. It's kind of hard to compress everything in 45 minutes. It's such a topic, and it's such a hot topic right now with everything you've been saying, and with global warming, and we have polar bears on the spot. So it would be great to have you some other time. I don't know, guys, if there's anything you would like to add.
Before we leave, I don't know if someone has left any questions, Agus?
No, I don't think so, because I actually never let the invitation to actually put any questions. But we can do a nice survey. No. While we were talking, I was thinking we should do a survey with questions from everyone around the world and see what can be answered on a future encounter, and that would be really amazing.
Great.
A new challenge.
Since Morten already offered, what can we say?
I mean, he said he would do it, so we'll do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
It would be great. Yeah.
One of the questions, yes, that now it makes sense why the question came to my WhatsApp here. So they are asking about the polar bears and the grizzlies. The hybrid, what would be the behavior? Would be similar to a polar bear or similar to a brown bear?
Fantastic. I love that question. And I always love being honest as well. So my first answer would be, I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows.
Right.
One of the very interesting things about polar bears is that they're such an iconic animal. Almost everybody knows a little bit about a polar bear. if you shout polar bear, you can usually raise money for your cause, which is what WWF is doing, and Greenpeace is doing, and Polar Bears International are doing. They use the bear to get money because everybody loves a polar bear. The interesting thing is that almost nobody studies polar bear behavior. There's a lot of study of, there's a lot of work going on regarding looking at how polluted are they, and you know, weighing them and collaring them and following them, and determining their where they live, and how much they move, and what they eat, and how they metabolize, and to some degree their populations. But there is almost nobody who sits down and studies polar bear behavior. It's of course also very difficult, because you need to be in a very cold place.
And follow it. Follow the polar bear.
Well, yes,
camera traps. I don't know.
Or position yourself somewhere where polar bears come by frequently. But since polar bears are not territorial, it's more difficult than with many territorial animals. So there are many things we don't know about polar bear behavior, and I would just have to say there's even less known about the behavior of the hybrids. We just don't know.
Yeah.
Right.
Perfect.
Awesome, my friend.
Questions.
Awesome.
More
really.
questions.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you, Morten, also for making time. I know we know you're moving and having some pretty hectic days. So thank you once again. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. Let's talk again.
You can go back to moving your boxes now.
See, you can. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for coming. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for waking up at this early morning in Australia.
Big pleasure. I would do it again for this talk. Thank you so much.
We'll see you, everyone. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Morten.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, my friend.